coming out this Friday, depending on where you are and when you are listening to this, is the -IO Armory deck. Hi, I'm Steelfur, Steelfur Speaks, and in this video, we're going to ask the question, is it worth it to buy the -IO Armory deck? So let's break this down. If you're new to Fab or you're getting into the game and you're wondering, hey, what's an Armory deck? Let's just clarify that up for you. Armory decks are new entry products that have started coming out in 2024 that provide you a pre-built classic constructed deck. That's the main format of Flesh and Blood of 60 cards that will get you into the game. They are supposed to be fresh out of the pack. They come with all the equipment, the tokens, everything you need to play, and they will get you into the game. The build quality has been quite high. They do also contain exclusive cards that can only be found in those decks, and typically so far those cards have been quite good. So keeping those things in mind, let's review the -IO Armory deck from a few different perspectives. The first is, obviously, do I think it's well designed? Do I think a new player is going to enjoy it? The second question is it a good deck to buy? Are the cards that it brings, the exclusive cards, powerful? Will they be needed by -IO players? Could you potentially resell them? The third is, of course, how much is it worth, and can we put a price on it? Does it have any notable reprints? And then the fourth is just an overall view of whether or not I think it's good and what it's going to do to the hero and the rest of the game. So let's ask the first question. Is it well built? So first, here we have the deck list. You can kind of see it is running 3 of a lot of cards, so it's pretty consistently built. And let's dive over to Fabry, which I still think is the best Fab deck building site, to have a look at those cards. And I'm going to call out what the new cards are. So starting off with -IO, this is a hero that was released in Bright Lights, so late 2023, and is a Mechanologist hero, so can only play Mechanologist cards, doesn't have a talent. She has the ability to look at the top card of her deck at any time, and once per turn she can play a Mechanologist card with item cost 0 or 1 from the top of her deck. As though it was an instant, it costs an additional 1 to play. So she's constantly trying to get the best value out of items, and you will see a lot of her powerful items in this deck. She has a signature weapon which gets Steam counters when she plays items, as long as it's got less than 6, and removes Steam counters to shoot attacks. It obviously costs an action point to do this. It does not get go again, but as you'll see, she has ways to get additional action points that she can use to spend to shoot the weapon more than once. First in terms of new cards is her equipment suite. She has 4 pieces of equipment. Heavy Industry Surveillance. When this defends, you may banish the top card of your deck. If it's a Mechanologist card, this gets +1 until end of turn. Heavy Industry Power Plant, action 1, destroy this. Whenever you boost this turn, gain 1, go again. It also has temper 2. Heavy Industry Ram Stop, when this defends, you may pay 1. If you do, it gets +1 to the end of the turn. Has temper as well, so it can also block for 2 and potentially give you 3 life during the game if you are willing to pay for it. And then Heavy Industry Gear Shift, action, destroy this, banish top 2 cards of your deck, gain 1 action point for each Mechanologist card banished this way. Battle Worn, when the combat chain closes, if this defended, put a -1 counter on it. It is worth noting that all of her equipment has temper or Battle Worn, so it will not only be able to be used, but also will give you the ability, even if you've blocked with it. That's very important. A lot of other heroes have Blade Break on their equipment, so when you defend with it, it gets destroyed, and you have to choose between the ability or the equipment. Rating this set of equipment, I think this is 10 out of 10 for a starter deck. Every piece of equipment has a solid ability. Every piece of equipment is powerful. The fact that she comes with, we call it a fridge in Fab terminology, but the fact that she comes with this much of a fridge in terms of armor block, potentially having, not just the standard amount, but actually she probably has about 10 life that she can gain just by playing this armor kit, is going to feel really good to a new player. It's going to give you a lot of options, and only one of those pieces requires a cost on defense. So you can use the helmet and banish the top card of your deck. And one thing you'll notice, this helmet requires a Mechanologist card. Every single card in this deck is a Mechanologist, so you're never going to whiff on this when you're playing this with this starter deck, and I think that's really important for new players. You can't ever have a bad experience with this helmet. It's going to give you 3 life. It's going to feel fantastic. And genuinely, some of these cards are incredibly well designed and powerful as Majestics outside of this box. I could genuinely see now. Mechanologist legendaries are quite good, but I don't think that, you know, some of these cards will hold their own against the legendaries and could delay your need to purchase a legendary for some time. So I think actually on the equipment suite, this deck is doing very, very well. I'm impressed with all of these pieces. And as we'll get into later when we review what sort of decks we've seen on the the Fab Discord, some of these pieces are making it into lists, even though there are all of the generics and existing cards there. So these are a very well thought out set, and I think just really powerful. Then there's loads of common cards that just say 0/3 boost, 1 for 4 boost, etc. These are the staple of Mechanologist. If you've never played Mechanologist, Boost says, let's find a card with Boost. As an initial cost to play this, you may banish the top card of your deck. If it's a Mechanologist card, this gets go again. So again, just noting that every card in this deck is a Mechanologist card, so you will never miss your boost. You will always get go again. And this is a very aggressive deck. So you're going to be boosting from the top of your deck. You're going to be burning through your own deck, which is what Mechanologists love to do, to make big combat chains that hit quite hard. And guess what? If you boosted 3 or more times in a turn, then you can play maximum velocity. And you're already starting to see the synergy with the chest piece. You pay 1, destroy it, and then whenever you boost, you gain 1 resource, go again. It's going to make it really easy to play 3 cards with boost, generate 3 resources. One of them could go on playing, your 1 cost boost. And then the other one could go on a maximum velocity, right? And if you pitch a blue for this, you've got 2 resources floating. You get another 3 from your boost. That's 5 resources. That can play most of the attacks you have in your deck. You could play 2, 1 throttle, maximum velocity, and a dive through data. You could play some combination of this as well as a boom grenade from the top of your deck, which costs an extra 1 from the dash resource. There's so many combinations enabled by this chess piece that it's very, very powerful. It's going to make playing this deck feel very smooth. The suite of reds on the attack side are really good. Maximum Velocity is a reprint, but it's a good reprint for this deck. I think it's an essential reprint. I will say it wasn't the most expensive card prior to the reprint, but that just means that including it is a no-brainer and a very smart decision to make the deck feel good, because this is the payoff, and you get 2 of those in this deck. This is going to be teaching new players they need to set up these maximum velocity turns, which is a core part of the Dash.io strategy. So I really like the fact that that was included. Fast and Furious is another new card in this set, and it says, boost, if you've cranked this turn, this gets +1. When this is banished from boosting, put a steam counter on an item you control with crank. So crank is a specific keyword that came out in Bright Lights and is used heavily by Dash.io. And Crank says, as this enters an arena, you remove a steam counter from it. If you do, gain an action point. Most of these items start with a steam counter. That counter gets removed at the start of turn, and then if there isn't a counter to remove, they get destroyed. But you can choose to remove that counter early, crank the card, and then by cranking the card, get an action point back. And you're already kind of guessing that if you play the card with Dash.io from the top and then crank, you get an extra action point. So you have a way to already have a spare action point on your turn, which you can use to fire the pistol again or do something else with. But what this does, which is really good, is lets you crank and then, get +1. So it's a 0 for 4. So it's on rate. But also by having 3 of these in your deck, it lets you save some of those items that you've cranked for another turn. So Boom Grenade is a card that's going to make your opponent want to block quite a lot. What Boom Grenade says is when an attack action you control hits, destroy this and deal 4 damage to your opponent. That's going to make your opponent want to block a lot, which often means your Boom Grenade might go away without having dealt damage. What the Fast and the Furious says is, hey, I'm going to surprise, keep it around for another turn. Okay, so that's really good. Backup Protocol Red essentially gets back a red attack action card from your graveyard. So that is a good way of just getting your best attacks back and also using those resources you're generating from the chest to get back a boost card to help you get to maximum velocity. Convection Amplifier isn't the best in this deck, but it is just a one-off, so it is just there as a way of closing out games. It gives an attack action dominate. It's a nice inclusion just to show what other items can do. It's probably going to be first on the list of cards to cut. Same with Dissolving Shield. This just prevents a little bit of damage, but it is, also a good example of an item and also more defensive options available for Dash IO. The yellows are okay. I would have just preferred to see a few more red attacks, but I think this is fine to include 0 to 60 and Zipper Hit yellow. These are often played in constructed Dash IO decks. The same with Boom Grenade yellow. The red's obviously better, but the yellow's pretty good as well. The blue suite is fine. Backup Protocol blue, I don't necessarily agree with, because backup protocols are weird. They can only fetch the same color that they are. You're not really going to want to get back a blue attack, but if you're building a deck that's going to include more items, then this is a fine item to include. Then we have Steam Canister, which again just helps keep an item around a bit longer. It's fun to give people an idea to play with. Not so strong. Again, quite high on the cut list because this is an aggro deck, so you don't want to set up this item just to keep something else around for another turn. And then we have the big bomb, which is Cerebellum Processor. So this is, again, one of the new cards that's unique in this box. And in the context of this discussion, they have also just banned a lot of cards that draw cards, like the Tomes of Fiendal and the Tomes of Divinity. But they did not ban this. And of course, banning this before it came out in an Armory deck would have been incredible, feels bad for players. So I could imagine that if they do think this card needs a ban, they're probably going to let people get the Armory deck, let them play with it for a month or two, and then probably step in and say, look, you've had some time to upgrade your Armory decks, you've had some time to enjoy it, but it's not good for the game. So one of my cautions about this Armory deck is I do worry about the future of Cerebellum Processor as a card, and if we invest a lot of the value of this Armory deck in the fact that you're getting this card, I would say that that is a concern of mine. Equally, if you're buying this card because Dash.io looks like she's going to be one of the premier aggro decks and you're chasing that, that meta game, that best aggro deck win, then you just have to accept that that's a loss. And as you'll see, based on the MSRP of this box, even if you buy this card and it isn't worth that long term, even if you get to enjoy it for a while, it might still be worth it. But let's break this down. So Cerebellum Processor, it has crank, so you can remove it to gain an action point when it comes into play. It enters with 2 Steam counters, which is pretty huge. Normally, cranked items only have 1, which means you can crank this and still keep it around for the next turn, which is pretty huge. And it has once per turn action 0, draw a card. Very important to note, it does not have go again, so you do need to get that other action point either from the crank or from the something else in order to get the full value out of this to be able to draw a card. But the fact is, this is an item that you can play. It can stay on your board for at least 2 turns. There are other ways to put Steam counters on these items. And it can draw you a card every turn that you can get a spare action point, and Dash.io is quite good at generating spare action points. In this deck, she's not as good at it because she's mostly going to generate them from her boots or from playing an item off the top card of her deck, but in Constructed, she has ways to get quite a considerable amount of action points, and she will be able to consistently use this card draw effect. So this is the power card that everyone is talking about from the set that will elevate Dash.io beyond the Armory box. Is what a lot of people are going to be buying this box for. Overall, my thoughts are, this is a really well-designed Armory deck. I have very few things to say about it. I think they've included a really good suite of equipment. I think they've included some really good and powerful unique Majestics, and I think the inclusion of the reprint on Maximum Velocity is also very good. I will say that I wouldn't have minded, just jumping over to the regular list, I wouldn't have minded a reprint of some of the other in-demand Majestics from Bright Lights, like Twin Drive, which is currently quite expensive, and a few other things. But for what it is, I think we've got a very good deck at the reasonable price of £40 MSRP. So I'm quite happy with this deck overall. I'm quite happy with the powerful unique Majestics that they've included, even though unique Majestics aren't typically something I like in products like this, because I don't think the only way to get Majestics should be through buying a, stock limited on the shelf product that might sell out. But if they're going to exist, I'd like to see them done in this way. Maximum copies that you can play in the box. So my biggest criticism of previous boxes has been including one of a unique Majestic, whereas of the unique Majestics, this contains max play sets, both obviously equipment, it has one of them. In the other Majestics, there are 3. And we just have, a nice, well-rounded box. And also, my other criticism of decks, which is that they sometimes include redundant cards, is kind of deflected with this as well, because this is a mechanologist deck, so every card has to be mechanologist, which does exclude the inclusion of some weird cards in order to keep the mechanologist count high and show what the mechanologist cards can do. Is this good for new players? Yeah, undeniably this is really good for new players. It just looks really well balanced. The reds look really strong. It's giving you, it's giving you power turns to play through. It's giving you aggro options. It's giving you a few defensive options. The equipment suite is just really solid. It's giving you a full tour of what Dash.io is capable for and giving you a good sort of baseline of Majestics. I think it's really good for new players. I think they've really knocked it out of the park with this. Let's just talk about cost a little bit. And you'll see the kind of what we're talking about here, which is that the value in these decks is really driven by the new cards. So if we look at the old cards, and I can kind of highlight them a little bit, Dash.io Majestic Hero costs 50p. The average cost of any common in these decks is about 2 pence. It's not, they're bargain basement. You can get them. Equipment is interesting. Usually the best equipment in the set ends up coming in at 10 or 11 pounds on Card Market Low. And then the bad equipment still usually ends up coming in at like 2, 3, 4 pounds. And the mid-range equipment usually comes in at about 6 pounds. And this is all based on previous Armory decks we've seen, like Armory deck, Azalea, etc., etc. So if you look at those previously, you can see, if we look at Armory deck Bolton, there's often and we look at Majestics, there's often like a good equipment that costs 11, 12 pounds. And then there's often, a few Majestics that cost 4 or 5 pounds and some that stand out, right? So that kind of looks fair. Then we can look at the Majestics and we can say, okay, maximum velocity, that's the only reprint, that's 2 pounds. Fast and the Furious feels like it's going to be a 4 pound Majestic. It could easily be like a 6 or an 8 pound Majestic. And then Cerebellum Processor Blue, I've just put at 11 pounds. It could easily be a 15 pound Majestic. It could go up that high, right? Because as we've kind of seen from these decks, the Bolton and the Azalea deck, there is a good spread on what people are willing to pay for these. The Azalea deck has a lot more 7 pound Majestics and 5 pound Majestics. The KO deck is weird because all of the value is basically concentrated in that one equipment, and I would say the KO deck is the worst of the Armory decks. They have gotten quite better since then, and you can even see in the Bolton deck the value is spread out quite nicely between the Majestic equipment and the Majestic there. So we could easily see these boxes containing, 11 pounds worth of value on those, and then easily coming in with, one equipment worth 11 pounds and some of these. So actually, if we think about the value of what this box could contain, with an MSRP of 39, now I'm not saying to buy this as a spec, because if you try and buy this to sell it for more than the price, you might find yourself losing money. But I'm saying that as a person approaching this as someone who needs the cards or as a new player, I do actually think with this deck, you are getting value for money. I think that these cards are quite useful, and I think that the value will probably be there. Even if all of these Majestic equipments were only worth 4 pounds, I still think Cerebellum Processor is a pretty good bet. The one thing I do want to say is if we think that Cerebellum Processor is going to get banned, and we think that it contains most of the value in the box, so remember that if there's only one card in the box that's worth money, it could easily be worth 15, 20 pounds. But I think Fast and the Furious will take some of the value. Then this box becomes a bit more of a risk, right? If Cerebellum Processor becomes a 15 pound Majestic, and then it gets banned because it's good card draw, then this box does become a bit more of a risk. So that is something to be concerned about. But they have said in interviews that they're not worried as much about Cerebellum Processor because it doesn't come with Go Again built in, and therefore it's a bit more work to get that Go Again on the card, and that means that they feel a bit more confident that it's not, as risky. because you have to work to get the go again, and it might miss. And I think that's perfectly fair. So taking on from that, we've got a good deck that I think is well designed with what I think are the right reds and a good mix of new powerful cards with 1 or 2 key reprints. So this is a good deck to buy for new players. What happens then? Is it a good deck to buy for old players? Well, if you're playing Dash.io, then you're obviously going to need these cards if they're meta. And I brought up one list, I think Motaz94. I was just cruising on the purple Discord to see what people were doing with it. I thought this was a good example of whether or not those cards are going to see play. And you can immediately see the legs slot in the leg slot because they give you more action points than the one that you got from the Achilles accelerators, which are still down here for the Arcane Barrier. You can see that Fast and Furious slots in because it's a 0 for 4, and it has that added bonus that if it gets boosted, it can keep an item around for a while. And you see Cerebellum Processor going straight in as well. And to a certain extent, you might see Heavy Industry Power Plant being paid as well for big turns. So you can see that out of those Majestics that I've called out as being good value in this box, we're actually saying that the only ones that might not see play is the Helmet, because there's a lot of generic helmets that are better. But if you're a new player, then you don't spend, £100 on one of the generic legendaries. This is a good stopgap measured. The gloves, just because Mechanologist has slightly better legendaries, they can play in the glove slot, but the chest and the legs both might see play in a competitive list. The same thing goes for the unique Majestics in the set. So you'll notice that list was playing Maximum Velocity somewhere. And you might you would have had to buy that previously. It would have been £6. It's just nice that you now have 2 of them. And if you think about it as well, it's just auto-including 3 of the unique Majestics in the set, the Cerebellum Processor and the Fast and the Furious. So there's very little actually going to waste when you're building your constructed deck based on what people are going to be building now with this Dash.io box, which makes it valuable and makes it worthwhile. Again, there is that Cerebellum Processor risk, but I wouldn't think about that now. If I was a new player and I thought, hey, items look cool, Mechanologist looks cool, Dash.io looks great, I want to play aggro, I would be buying this list. And I think that it's going to be great as an upgrade path through to getting you somewhere else. The only thing I will say is just getting to a full list is a mixed bag with Mechanologist. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if we go back to this sample list that I found, okay, we're playing high octane. That doesn't cost that much. But the other Majestics in Dash can unfortunately be somewhat expensive. Specifically looking at stuff like Heist and looking at stuff like Twin Drive. Now, if I was building my first Mechanologist deck, I would probably put those at the bottom of the priority list for things to buy, because they are just very expensive for what they are, which is a very powerful, but unfortunately very expensive Majestic. Unfortunately, I will say this, Twin Drive is kind of a really, really good card. And it's fairly easy to explain why. Twin Drive is a card that just says, hey, I had it up here a second ago, sorry. It says, on the text, the text is very simple. It just says boost and boost. But what that does to all of your cards that require boosting, it gets you 2 resources off Heavy Industry Power Plant. It gets you the ability to play Maximum Velocity with a 3-card hand instead of a 4-card hand. It does a lot of work. And you'll see one of these cards, High Octane. Whenever you boost, gain 1 action point. Twin Drive gives you 2 action points off 1 card. It's just a really powerful, really synergistic card. And that's why, unfortunately, if you look at Card Market, because I am European, you'll see that Twin Drive regular goes for £30. So there are some quite expensive cards to go into building a fully classic constructed Dash deck. My advice, if you like Dash.io, is just not to buy those as your first card. Don't buy the Heists, don't buy the Twin Drives. Just flash out with regular commons, powerful commons that do a decent chunk of damage. And then if you decide you really like the class, then start spending for Twin Drive. The other cards that are included in this list, even stuff like Crown of Providence, there is a version of it that's like 40 quid. You can buy that legendary. It's perfectly reasonable. Teklo Foundry Heart is not overpriced. I think you can buy one for £20 listed here. So your legendaries aren't, you know, specifically backbreaking to build Dash.io. It is just, unfortunately, these specific Majestics from Bright Lights. Now, I will say, Bright Lights, the reason these are super expensive is that Bright Lights was not opened massively because it wasn't a super popular set. But with the rollout of this Armory deck, increasing the value of things like Heist and Twin Drive, you may see more Bright Lights being opened. And, you know, Bright Lights is a pretty good set for you to open if you like Dash.io because it's a, you know, mechanologist only set. So you could buy a box or two of that and see how it feels. You might open some Twin Drives. You might open some cards you really need. Both Heist and Twin Drive are in that set. There's also a mechanologist Marvel, which maybe you shouldn't play, but it's pretty good. And the other Majestics in this deck are not that bad, right? They're just not. If you look at them, stuff like Teklo Cores, a £4 card. Stuff like Signal Jammers, a £2 card. You know, if you start looking at Pulse Wave Harpoon, it's again £3-4. High Octane, it's about £5, but there are cheaper versions out there. You know, so this deck is actually quite reasonable, unfortunately, aside from those two cards. So I would just recommend if you're building your upgrade path, don't go via that. Also, you know, I haven't tested this deck, so I don't know if it's any good. I just thought it was a good example of the sort of cards people are including. So yeah, Dash.io Armory deck, really good. I actually really like it. If all the Armory decks are like this, I really support them. You know, just play sets of the unique cards, make it really easy to get them off one purchase. And then just hopefully if they become out of print and hard to get, then these cards like Fast and Furious and Cerebellum Processor will make their way into the expansion slot in a future set. Though that hasn't been confirmed, that's just saying that's what they should do. If the Dash.io Armory decks sell out, they should be doing that. They should be putting these into the expansion slot later on. But there you go. Do you think this is good? Are you planning on buying one? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, please do like and subscribe to the channel. That is the fuel to my fire and it keeps me going. And I'll speak to you all very, very soon.